Okay, so we'll get going, but before we jump in, we've got a couple of land acknowledgements. We thought we'd mix it up and make it international.
Sure.
I'll start with Andrew, who's from Australia.
So I'm Andrew Treloar. I'm from the Australian Research Data Commons, as you can tell from the extremely... Thank you. I'm Andrew Treloar from the Australian Research Data Commons, here with Natalie Harrower from the Canadian Research Data Centre Network. Welcome to this session of the National Data Services Interest Group. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting, the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I should also say that I normally work from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation.
Thanks, and I'm coming here from McMaster University, which is in Hamilton, just outside of Toronto, Ontario, and that's the traditional lands of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and they're protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. There's lots of unceded territory across the northern half of Turtle Island, sometimes known as Canada, but this one is under treaty. So that's that. Welcome to everybody. We're going to do a few questions to see who we've got in the room, but usually at these things we like to remind everyone of the code of conduct. So if anybody's planning on being really cheeky and mean, read this first, and we'll be good. I'm not going to go through all those principles. Okay, so here's the agenda that we have for today. We'll do a little bit around group demographics, see who you are, why you've come here. Then Andrew will go into the history of the group because it's had a couple of iterations. Then we're going to look at the definition of what this actual group is, try to look at the scope of it so that we're clear on what we're looking at moving forward. And then we will go into a number of presentations. And so what we're doing today around National Data Services is looking at how this links in with the global Open Research Commons model. So we've decided to kind of pair these groups going forward and determine if we can come up with a profile for National Data Services that fits within the GORC model. So how do we, I guess, tailor it, in a sense, to the requirements, the specificities of a national data service, after we've defined what a national data service is, hopefully slightly loosely. And we have a couple of colleagues joining us online, so they'll introduce themselves when they come on, and giving presentations of how their organizations fit into this kind of framework, and then we'll move into a discussion. Yeah, okay, so that's the plan. All right, so I didn't do a Mentimeter because that was really cool on the first day, and now everybody's done one, so I decided to old school it and try to ask different questions. So, who comes from a tropical or subtropical climate? Like in terms of where you're living right now? Okay, no one. So we have no Brisbane people here, okay? All right, winters that are mostly below zero?
Which degree scale?
Celsius? Sorry. Okay. Okay. Where are you from? Sweden, okay. And how about temperate systems with little variance? And we have the UK and Ireland, great. How about in spring heading into summer? Okay. This is like a skill testing question, I think. Okay, autumn heading into winter? Okay, so we got the hemisphere question over with. Did anybody not fit any of those profiles? Have I missed part of the planet? No, okay.
Keith and I were shaking our heads. Sorry.
At what?
Keith and I were shaking our heads at the idea that you could have a temperate climate with little or no variation, because we both come from Melbourne. ...
Okay. So who here has ever accessed, as part of your work, a national data service? As far as the definition in your mind goes. Accessed it as a researcher or in other ways. Okay, so most people, not everyone. Anyone actually supports a national data service? Okay, yeah, okay. How about disciplines? Natural sciences, broadly speaking, health, social sciences and humanities. That's where I'm coming from. Yeah, what did I miss? Generalist? All of it? All the things? Anyone else? Yeah. Okay, and then who in the room has seen a koala or will see one before they leave Brisbane? Yeah? Okay. Giraffe? not likely before Brisbane. Anyway, Bear? Okay. All right. Okay, good. Well, there we go. That's the end of the welcome questions. I thought I'd make them a little bit different. Let's jump right in now that we've done a bit of that. And I think I'm going to pass this over to you. This is that's the red thing if you want it.
I think I might have used these once or twice before.
Yeah, right.
Thanks. So this is, for those of you that have come to, well, actually, let me ask another demographic question. For how many people is this their first National Data Services Interest Group meeting? Okay, so a little bit more than half. So this group has gone through a couple of iterations. So the first one was roughly for 3 years, and we have 2 French colleagues joining us online, I should say, Françoise Genova and Gilles Mathieu, and they'll be speaking a little bit later, and my thanks to them for staying up for what is now after 1 o'clock at night, or 1 o'clock in the morning, I guess I should say. And so the first version of the National Data Services Interest Group, Françoise was one of the co-chairs of that version of the group. And then in 2019, there was this parallel piece of work that I'll talk about in a minute, which was developing the idea of a global open research commons. And it was felt that there was quite a lot of overlap between the National Data Services and the Global Open Research Commons. And so the NDS interest group kind of went into hiatus for a while. And a number of the people working on that shifted their focus to work across on the GORC activity. And then in 2024, we had a BOF where a number of people said, well, they're not quite the same, and we would still like to have a place where we can talk about the challenges of running or using national data services. And so we had a second BOF at Plenary 23, which discussed a draft statement of work and the need for a definition of a national data service, and we had a session at Virtual Plenary 24, which was March, April of this year. So it's kind of gone into hibernation and reawoken. And one of the reasons that it's reawoken is that it's become clear that the Global Open Research Commons model, while it's potentially going to be useful for the activity of this group, there's certainly not overlapping circles in a Venn diagram. There are Global Open Research Commons that are smaller than national data services, that are larger than national data services, that by some definitions, in fact, aren't national data services. So there's a relationship, but it's not certainly an equality relationship. So those of you with keen eyes will have noticed that a year ago we said we needed a definition, and you may have seen that we don't have a definition yet. And that's because it turns out it's complicated. We did have a long discussion about this at the last plenary, and where we got to at that plenary was, well, we need to have a number of dimensions on which you define what a national data service is. And in particular, one of the things that we've realised is that, thanks to the vagaries of the English language, national data service is ambiguous. And so when you talk about a national data service, do you mean a service that is provided, a data service that is provided by a national organisation? Or do you mean the organisation that is providing the service? So, okay, so I work for the Australian Research Data Commons. We are a national data service. We have a national charter. We're funded by our Commonwealth Government. We do data stuff. We would describe ourselves, well, we'd probably describe ourselves as data research infrastructure. But anyway, we are a national data service. We also provide a number of national data services. So it's kind of messy, and the co-chairs have spent the last 5 or 6 months wrestling with how do we try and tease this apart in a way that's helpful for the activities of this group. So we have a definition slide, which I will... Yes, thank you. Are you able to click across to the Chrome browser, or do I need to stop the slideshow here?
Remember the escape, and then you should find it.
Okay, thank you. So I've talked about the ambiguity already. Is it an organisation or is it a service? And I guess what I'd like to do this morning, well, first of all, I'd like to make it so you could see the text, because that would be helpful. Now, is that large enough for people, or do you want it larger? Okay. Yeah, so where we've got to is we'd like to tease out each of those words, national, data and service. And I guess our hope for this bit of this session, noting that while you bring a range of perspectives to this, it's not like we can take a vote in this room and say, right, the whole world agrees this is what we mean by a national data service. But we'd like to get your feedback on our current thinking and hopefully converge on something that we can all live with. So, national frame of reference. So the questions for us there are, does it have to be nationally funded? Is it something that's provided only to users in a single country, or it can be used outside that country? And what do we do about pan-national services, such as EOSC? And so I might stop there. And Natalie, do you mind running around with the microphone if people would like to? So does anyone have any thoughts on that first bit before we move on to data? Juan has thoughts, and I will check what's happening online.
Yeah, I think you've set an impossible question there.
All of the above?
Because, for me, the introduction about the problem with the word service, I absolutely 100% agree with. But then, depending on which definition of service you take, you choose one of the two options for national.
Okay. So if I can...
Do you understand what I'm saying? That if you're saying it's an organisation,
yep.
A national organisation is a different thing from a technical service and delivered to a nation.
Okay. Anyone else have any... So I just want to check that our online colleagues are able to
And just
ask questions.
Say your name and where you're from as well.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Stephen DeCosta from Link Digital. So for me, national law means around the sort of sovereign integrity of the thing being observed and being reflected through the service. So it's less about institutional authorization, more about the actual quality of that identity.
Okay.
So some things can be national just because there's a geographic extent, but they're not quite representative of an identity or the sovereign nature.
Okay.
So to me, it's more about the authoritative statement of this is a national observation, a particular data class or whatever.
Okay. I mean, in an earlier version of this, I thought it was going to be simple because I thought we could say, well, if it's nationally funded, but then you run into things like EOSC, which are pan-national. Sandra.
Remember to say who you are.
Thanks, Nat. Sandra Collins, University Librarian, University College Dublin in Ireland. So I don't know why funded needs to be a part of the definition. I'm just thinking through our situation. So we provide the Irish Social Sciences Data Archive. It was initially nationally project funded to establish it, and then the institution, our library, absorbed it and runs it now. I mean, I suppose in the end, our money does come from the nation, but it's not specific. It's been institutionalised. It's tricky to keep it going without dedicated funding, but I don't think that that's a criteria for it. And then I think, at least if I'm thinking of our example, our data is generated in Ireland or refers to Ireland, but it's intended for you, or like it's open to use outside of the country. Yeah, thank you. It's really interesting to think about.
Okay, I'll go to Lee first and then over to Keith. Remember to say who you are.
Good, thank you. Hi, Lee Wilson, Director of Research Data Management at the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. So I think our situation is quite similar. We have some services that are defined as national services that are only partially nationally funded, and much of the operating funding does come from a consortial model with post-secondaries and specifically academic libraries. So I think that's maybe too delimiting then to have nationally funded. In terms of scope, yes.
Yeah.
So thinking about like our National Discovery Service. So the scope that we have set is we have a metadata aggregation service that specifically targets data living in quote-unquote Canadian data repositories defined as repositories supported by a Canadian entity. It's tricky, right? Like a Canadian Post-Secondary Research Institute. So it's data primarily but not exclusively about Canada. And it is data that is often generated by researchers who are working at a Canadian post-secondary or research institute. But in terms of consumption, yeah, it's meant to be globally applicable and anyone can come and use it.
Yep.
And from a repository perspective, it's more so usage is obviously is broad. Anyone can find and download and reuse the data as appropriate to the license. But Canadian researchers from a Canadian post-secondary research institute are only eligible for depositing. So that's, I don't know if that helps a lot, but that's sort of the mess of definitions that we've been working through in our service delivery.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we might figure out that we don't need to define it this carefully.
Yeah, so
Keith, yeah.
I mean, and an earlier version of nationally funded was national in scope. And then someone said, yeah, but what does national in scope mean? Yeah. But I take your point about the funding. Keith?
Yes, and actually, sorry, this is Keith Russell from the Australian Research Data Commons, which is an easy example because we are very clearly nationally funded, but there are plenty of other examples of national data services that are national in scope, but are, for example, membership organisations, attract funding from researchers or are institutionally supported. Their intent is very much national, their scope is national, but they're not nationally funded as such. And I think, yes, and I think the other, moving on to that second point, I think it's very hard for a lot of services to say we are completely limited to one country, but I think there are quite a few services that say our primary scope or intent is one country.
Yep.
Okay. Any other appetite for national, or have we exhausted that?
I think, I mean, that's been helpful, so thank you for that. Hopefully that's the most controversial one. Well, we'll see. Second one, data. So are we just talking about data from the research sector? And so I should caveat this by saying this data from data for distinction is something that we've been playing with in the ARDC for a while now, and something I personally feel invested in. Having said that, if you all say it's a terrible idea, then I'm happy to let it go. But
What's the idea?
So I guess the idea is, for me, when people say, oh, we do research data, again, that's ambiguous. Is it data that's being generated by researchers, or is it data that is useful for researchers? And the second, as soon as you throw in data for researchers, then your scope just expands out like that. So all of the cultural collection sector, for instance, which is apparently important, Sandra, would fit in under data for research, but not a lot of it is data from research. So if we're talking about a national data service, is it from the research sector? Does it include for research, or does it include data that's generated outside the research sector altogether? Anyone
I
have
will
any
say
thoughts?
I should stop chairing the group if B is not acceptable.
Wow.
That's what my national data service does.
Wow. Boy,
Yeah.
that escalated quickly.
Well, just like to cut to the chase. No, but it gets really tricky because the data collection, so it's the CRDCN makes available to researchers national statistical data that is owned and stewarded by Statistics Canada. So it's collected through things like the census, national surveys, that sort of thing. There's research in that process to an extent as well.
Yeah.
So, we could stick it in the first one or in A, but really it fits squarely under B. And we aren't calling it National Research Data Services as well, which I think
That's true.
is worth saying. I used to think of the line between data in general and research data as a lot clearer than I think of it now.
Yeah.
Sort of 10, 15 years on thinking about these things.
Right. So putting aside Sandra's ultimatum that if we don't agree with her, she'll take her toys and go home, does anyone have any other thoughts on that?
But I'm happy to add to the ultimatum.
Oh, okay, all right. So Sandra's +1 to the ultimatum from Sandra. Juan?
Yep. Back to Juan for those that are online.
Yeah, I didn't give my name first time, so it's Juan Bucaregi, UKRI. Well,
Sorry, who are you and where are you from?
I just said that.
Did you? Oh, okay. Sorry, I was focusing on my bad. Men can't multitask, apparently.
So I think that, which way around is it? A includes B, because the minute you use a piece of data from elsewhere in research, it immediately becomes a piece of data that's in research. Because unless you're going to use it and then forget you ever used it. You know, the minute you use it, write a paper. The minute you use it, add 3 to it. It becomes data inside research. So I'd say, I'd definitely include B, don't worry. But I'd say A actually subsumes B.
All right.
Walk off early if we don't include B.
Okay.
Anyone else? Yep, Keith?
And this is in direct response to Juan. Here we are. I know of examples in Australia where the intent is not specifically for research, but it is used a lot for research.
Yeah.
So that means it's not, the intent of the service is not specifically for research. Yes, yeah, okay. So we're so there. Again, I'd say probably is it intent for research or is it a service that might? If it's a service or data that might be used for research, then I'd probably say it's out of scope. But if it's intended specifically for research, then it would be more central to this interest group. I guess.
Can you say that distinction again? Sorry.
If it is just generally data that might be used for research but is not specifically provided with that intent in mind, I'm thinking of a lot of government data platforms, for example. They're not necessarily for research. Yes, they can be, but it's not their only intent versus a service that is actually focused on providing it to research.
Okay. Wait, no, I have to go over here first.
Again, Stephen DeCosta, Link Digital. So when it comes to data, I'd be thinking around it being data that is part of observability, so a national extent of observability of like geodata, extracted resource data.
Yep.
Or it's like a canonical reference data. Mm-hmm. So again, it's a service orientation like persistent identifiers. But when it comes to data that might be more of a capability, and I think that's what you're speaking to, where it's compute, network, storage capability that's serviced, I think it's a matter of whether you're going to work with the data in situ, so it's a data service to work in situ, or it's a extractive resource. So I don't think it matters. It's as long as you say data, not data, then it becomes more plural.
I was born in South Australia, so I say data and dance and castle and anyway.
Did you want to say something else, Juan? No? Oh.
Well, I said they're not online.
Oh, okay.
That if we're talking about the data service, we might have a different definition of data than if we're just talking about the data. So I'm still with you, can't separate it into 3 orthogonal dimensions.
Okay, no, I see what you're saying.
Can we debate each other as chairs?
Sure.
So I don't think I care about the answer. Like, I think if you want to define yourself as a national data service because you're doing those things that, you fit within that with your own definition, I'm happy to have you in the group. But so what do we need it for? I'm playing devil's advocate. What do we need to be this precise about the definition for?
So I think we need, clearly we haven't rehearsed this, I think we need it so that people can look at our group and say, is this a group where I could meet people like me or people where I could have useful conversations? That is about as far as I would want to go. I'm not trying to come up with a you're in, you're out definition.
Okay.
It's more guidance for people about what is it this group cares about. Yeah. Sorry, Lee?
Yep, coming. Say again, because there's people online.
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. Lee Wilson. Again, so I think in that sense is that if that's what we're building the definition for, then I don't think it matters so much,
Okay.
the forefront question. I think it's interesting, and I think it's good to note. But I think there's so many instances where you have a service where it's not specifically targeted at research, or the data maybe weren't really intended for research purposes, but over time, for whatever reason, became useful for research purposes, and now they are research data, to Juan's point. Like, as soon as the data is used in research, then it's research data. So I don't know why we need to limit ourselves so strongly. But
all right, so I think what I'm hearing is advocacy in general across the room for a more inclusive definition. And I'm still thinking about one's comment about you can't actually split data from services. So I want to come back to that one. Yep.
And I would just like, it was Sandra Collins, University College Dublin. I would just like to muddy the waters further and think of citizen researchers.
Yeah.
So, like, what even is a researcher? So if I, yeah.
We have citizen scientists up in the definition.
Yeah, okay, so then...
Because, that's absolutely one of the use cases. That's data collected by people because, I don't know, they care about rare birds. And then that goes into Atlas of Living Australia and is absolutely then data that gets used by researchers.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'm hearing we go for an inclusive definition, and then the last one is services. Again, caveat, I'm still thinking about Juan's comment. Maybe if we can kind of short-circuit this. Does anybody think we shouldn't include machine-accessible services in that? Okay, good. That's the right answer. And so one of the questions that we got asked at the last virtual plenary was, okay, great. So if you're talking about services, what do you mean? Do we need a list of the services? And I'm simply going to cheat here and say there's another group that's worrying about that. So Muldreth, I mean, I'm not too sure whether GORC or Muldreth are worse acronyms. I'm involved in both groups. It's a line ball. So Muldreth is mapping the landscape of digital research tools, and I can never remember what the H stands for. It'll come to me. Maybe it was just Muldreth was too difficult. Anyway, it's another RDA group that is trying to map out all of the services around the research data lifecycle. And my proposal to the room is we just say, then they worry about what the list of services is. Any thoughts on the service bit? Yeah?
Coming.
Stephen DeCosta again. So I think the service one is easier and harder, but reflecting on all three actually, as an example, I think on any one of those three there needs to be a horizon, like a omnidirectional horizon type definition.
So can you tease out what that means?
So some organisation or some collective or some program's horizon, the way they see things, is the full horizon of service or the full horizon of the data within a particular domain, say, for geodata. Or it's the full horizon of what national means. National jurisdiction, national funded, national scope, that kind of stuff. So when it comes to like almost like a Venn diagram of the three, at least one of those would have a national perimeter to it, or a fully inclusive. So when it comes to service, I think that would be a service that is for all of the nation, or all of the nation's concerns around that domain, or all of the nation's concerns around things like identifiers.
So to pick a really simple example to crystallise that. So my organisation runs a national persistent identifier. Well, we run a number of national persistent identifier services, but we operate the data site DOI service within Australia. And so that is an example where the scope of that is anyone in Australia who wants to mint a DOI can do so through our service. I guess people outside Australia can mint DOIs as well. We don't geo-block the service, but it's primarily intended for Australians. Okay, so the synthesis of all of that was, Yeah, we haven't finished the synthesis. So this is the synthesis just for the data bit. So I think probably what we need to do as an outcome from that is take this discussion and boil it down into a quite broad definition, which we can share with the interest group. So those of you that are signed up for the RDA interest group, we have the ability to push messages out to you as posts, and so we'll post a summary of this discussion and what the synthesis definition is that comes out of that, probably next week-ish. All right, thank you for that. That was very helpful. Go back to...
Yeah, here. Just say who you are.
Paul Fagan from the Taxion, and I'm the director of the Israel Data Science and AI Initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Does the service include repository, or is it...
Yes.
So it's not stated in any way. It's like, it's just... So we're talking also about repository and services that will lead you to other institutional repositories.
Yes, yeah, discovery services, repository services, identifier services. I mean, that's that list of services thing that I talked about. There's data management planning services, yeah, potentially analysis services. There's a whole range of things there. And the Muldreth group, as I say, is trying to map out the landscape of what all those services are and point to examples of them.
So the service can be about the data or about things you do with the data.
Yeah, yeah,
I guess is the broader way of looking at it.
Yep. Okay, so we also need to, so now that we've had the conversation about the definition, we also need to think about what we're going to do over the next year or so, and we hopefully have allowed time for that at the end. So what I'd now like to do as context for 3 different data service presentations is talk about this. So this is the thing that came along and caused the original version of the National Data Services Interest Group to pause for a bit. And this is a thing called the Global Open Research Commons. I'm a co-chair of this group as well. And so this was us trying to think through, if you're trying to build a research commons, which is not necessarily the same as a data service, if you're trying to build a research commons, what are the essential elements that make up a research commons? And so this is work that got published 4 years ago, something like that. And there have already been a couple of presentations on the GORC model at this conference already. For those of you that have never, well, actually, has anybody not seen this particular model before? Okay. No, that's okay, so I can go through it really quickly. So the point of this was to try and say, if you are building a commons, what are the things you have to have? In our view, based on an extensive literature analysis, a speaker series with 12 different speakers from different kinds of commons around the world, and a whole lot of work since that. And a number of groups have looked at this and have said, yeah, that looks like it's about the kind of stuff that you need to worry about. And the core idea is that the bottom 3 hexagons, the bottom 3 essential elements, are the more technology-focused elements. So you need, in order to have a research commons, you need some way of computing over the data, you need somewhere to store the data, you need some kind of network infrastructure to move stuff around, you need access and authentication infrastructure, and that's the kind of the technology piece. You need to have research objects. You can't have a commons, an empty commons, if I can put it like that. So there are research objects, and those are different kinds of things. They could be data, they could be publications, they could be models, they could be workflows, a whole range of different kinds of outputs of research. And then there's the services and tools piece, and I've already said that the Muldreth group is thinking about services and tools, and we'll probably at some point in the future just point to Muldreth for that piece. We have nuanced the services and tools more recently, and we're now thinking about user-facing services and back-end enabling services, and that'll probably show up in a future version of the model. Across the top is the piece that often gets missed when people talk about commons, which is where we say, yeah, but it's not just the technical piece, it's all of the human stuff across the top. So you need to have people to run it. You need to have rules about who's allowed to do what with the stuff in the commons. You need to have a governance structure for the commons. You need to engage with your users to make sure that you're meeting their needs. And you need some way of ensuring that what you're doing is sustainable. A lot of point in having a commons that people come to rely on that disappears in 2 years when the funding dries up. And then in the middle of all of this is standards, because we strongly believe that we shouldn't be trying to invent new standards wherever possible. We should be using existing standards for all of these things. So that's the essential elements. And people looked at that and they said, yep, that's great. We can see that that makes sense. How do you actually build one? And so what we spun out of that was a thing called the International Model. And the International Model goes into lots more detail about how you would construct each of those elements if you're putting a commons together, tries to group things into core elements and desirable elements and optional elements. It's actually, and is actually quite sophisticated and complicated. And we're going to show you examples of a spreadsheet version of the International Model from my organisation, a narrative version, which is probably much easier to appreciate for Natalie's organisation, and then work in development for, well, that's the wrong, I shouldn't have said work in development. We're going to hear from two of our French speakers who are joining us online, what they're doing to apply the model to what they're doing in France. In addition to this spreadsheet container and the narrative thing that you're going to see in a minute, we have a web graph version of the model that is currently in development and which we showed off earlier this week. So we recognise that the spreadsheet's not the ideal container for this. It's where we started. It's probably not what we're going to be using as the source of truth in the future. So, the idea for the National Data Services Group was that we would try and construct what we call implementation profiles. What happens if you take this model and you apply it to your organisation as a way of describing what you do. This is one of the ways that the GORC International Model is being used. And so originally this group said, oh, we just need to come up with a National Data Services implementation profile. And what we've realised is that coming up with a profile, given the diversity that we were talking about in the definitions discussion, is probably not going to be doable, or at least not going to be doable as a starting point. And so what we've decided to do instead is to say, let's start with things that are national data services. Let's apply the model to them and then abstract out of them the common features. And so that's the work we're doing at the moment. And so what we'd like to do is just take you through 3 different examples: ARDC, CRDCN, and Recherche Data Gouv from France. So very quickly, to give you some context, so this is the organisation I work for. It doesn't fit well on the slide, but never mind. So we're a research data infrastructure facility. We're a national data service. Our purpose is to provide Australian researchers with competitive advantage through data, but our services are all available to anyone regardless of whether they're in Australia or not. And Rory, who has just joined us, I'm not doing this to shame you, Rory, we've talked about Muldrith a couple of times. So Rory is co-chair of the Muldrith group. And if you have questions... Sorry? Yes, so if you're interested in mapping the landscape of research data services, go to the Muldrith session at 1:30. And if you're interested in what is a research service, then Rory's the guy to talk to. So anyway, that's that's us. This is our strategy on a page. And this is really just to give you context of the thing I'm about to show you. So we have a number of thematic research data commons. Yes, I know it's complicated with the Australian Research Data Commons, and we offer thematic research data commons. Long story, I'm not going to bore you with it. So we have a number of different thematic research data commons. Sorry, I need to move back to the microphone. We run a research cloud. We have a whole pile of services around discovery and linkage and data interop, which we call the National Information Infrastructure. And we have a chunk of work on skills where we're collaborating closely with our friends in the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. Shout out to their skills lead, Catherine DeVita, sitting there. So that's us. All right. So what does it look like if we apply the international model to that? And the international model is complex, and I'm not going to go through it in a lot of detail because we simply don't have enough time. But just to give you a sense of how the model, yeah, you're not going to be able to read that, are you? Sense for how the model, how you might apply the model to an actual service. Is that readable, kind of, from the back? So basically, we have a series of tabs. Rules of governance and leadership, rules of participation and access, sustainability, engagement, human capacity, and so on. And so let me pick, actually I might pick governance and leadership because that's the one, no?
Well, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I know, that's why I thought I should show it in two different versions. Yeah, maybe not. Okay.
I'd do a different one.
All right, so let's pick engagement. Okay, so you have the essential element, you have categories and subcategories, and for this one, so one of the categories, not all things have subcategories, one of the categories for engagement is community input and feedback. And so another is promotion to intended audiences, another is incentivisation, another is engagement with other commons. So these are all activities that happen under engagement, and Keith Russell over there is responsible for our outreach portfolio, and his team do a lot of this kind of work. Some of these have attributes, so community input and feedback would have attributes around structured feedback, attribution and acknowledgement, response to how the feedback was used. So this is, if you like, progressively going into more and more detail about how you might do some of this based on an analysis of what existing commons are doing. I want to be clear and say that this is not meant to be a prescriptive model. It's not us saying this is how you have to do it. It's saying this is how other commons do it, and here are some things that you might think about doing if you're wanting to do this in your commons. And over here we have consideration levels where we have core and desirable and optional. And core is us. This used to be mandatory, and then we realised, well, we can't say mandatory if we're saying we don't mandate things. So it's now just core. And so core is you really should think about doing this. Desirable is kind of more obvious. It's, yeah, you might want to think about doing this, and optional is up to you. So for instance, document and have public processes around what you do is a way of maintaining a high level of transparency. Yes, that's true. It's a desirable thing to do, but we're not saying it's core. And we have, and we have over on the right examples of what that might look like, as well as the primary sources that this was derived from. So we have 400 lines like this across the various tabs of the spreadsheet. So a lot of detail about how you might go about applying the model. And this is linked from the slides, so you'll have access to this later. But let me be clear that this analysis of the ARDC is very much based on my perspective as someone who works for the ARDC. Should not be interpreted as an official ARDC position. And as Françoise, I think, will tell you when she talks about the French work, what they've discovered is that if you're doing this for your organisation, it really works much better if you do it as a part of a team. So you have differing perspectives about what it is the organisation does. So this is absolutely just Andrew going through and filling in the spreadsheet on his own. It's not an official ARDC view. That's probably about as much as I want to say on that. Let me now pass to Natalie.
Yeah, I think how are we doing for time there?
50 minutes in.
Okay. Grand. So let's see. Okay. I think I'll stand out here so I can Don't have to take my glasses on and off. Yeah. Okay, I will go really fast then.
No. That wasn't what I meant.
Yeah, so CRDCN, Canadian Research Data Centre Network, is where I'm coming from. And we were established in 2000, so we're celebrating our 25th anniversary right now. We are a national research infrastructure for quantitative research, so into stats, in the social sciences and population health. And we provide access to the very sensitive microdata, so person-level, de-identified data. What's interesting, I think, is that we work in very strong partnership with Statistics Canada. So we don't own the data, but we facilitate access for the academic research community. Statistics Canada also makes data available to other government departments. They do research on it within StatsCan themselves, and they, in fact, have a separate technical infrastructure to do that. Don't ask me why. That's before my time there, why they came up with 2 different access mechanisms. I don't think it's a great idea, but that's what it is. So we deal with the research community, and we have 45 of the Canadian universities, which is all of the big ones and most of the medium-sized ones, as part of the network. And we're hosted by McMaster University, which is where I am based. And these are just some stats on the left-hand side. You can see the kinds of data sources that are available by theme, and I won't go into any more detail on that. So what I will do is switch to, what was escape? Ooh, double microphone. Hold on a sec. I know I saw my name there before, Andrew.
Yes, if you go to the browser.
Oh, okay. There we go. Right. Grand. So I've been involved with GORC on and off, but not in a consistent way in terms of how Andrew's been leading it. I've kind of jumped in and out. And at one point, I saw the spreadsheet. This is a couple of years ago. And I thought, oh my, this thing is overwhelming. Like I cannot wrap my brain around it, but I think it's important. I want to wrap my brain around it. So I did what, most people in this sort of organization of RDA do, is I signed up to write the report to help explain what it was, because then I figured I'd have to actually understand it. But what the GORC group has come up with, and this was just, I think, in advance of a Lawrence Center workshop that did a deep dive on the model, that was in July, and I was at that. I was fortunate to be at that, is they came up with a Google Doc instead of putting everything in the spreadsheet from left to right and you're scrolling all over the place and losing track of where you are, that you can actually look at it in a kind of narrative format. So what I did is I filled it out. There was a question of how do you prioritize these elements. I won't go into that today, and it was mentioned at the GORC meeting. But if we take an example of governance and leadership, this is a different way of doing it. So what I would say is if you're interested in looking at your own organization using this GORC model, or you want to talk about it with anyone else, take a look at the spreadsheet just to see how it's laid out. Try to read through it, but then jump into this. I'd say the spreadsheet has more detail. So you may want to flip back to it if there's a certain thing that's really important. But when it comes to trying to wrap your brain around it, maybe you're different than me, but this linear method was much easier than the spreadsheet. And I did very brief responses, and like Andrew said, these are just mine. And I don't say that I don't say that in a way, I say it because I think where you're working in the organization and what you're doing is going to give you a different perspective on these things. So we had a staff retreat about a month ago, and I decided it was time to introduce everybody to this GORC model, so I did a kind of quick presentation on it. And then we just jumped into one of these areas, not this one. And I said, let's see how we do on this. And it was actually a really amazing activity to do with the team, because everyone started seeing the work that they do framed in these areas that reflect what other organizations are doing. And that, I think, is really valuable. It was team building because they could see what they were doing reflected, but it helped open things up from a service that is, you cannot access the data. You can't be doing this work unless you're in Canada. You don't have to be Canadian, but you have to be located in Canada. You have to work with one of the universities. We're doing this, but others are doing similar things globally, and that was very interesting. So I won't read through all of these things, but what's good about this is you can decide with this little drop-down, is this element relevant to your organization now? Do you think it'll be relevant later, or is it not relevant? So for the governance side, which I named as one of the top things, that's important in terms of elements to our organization. And I chose that because the relationship with Statistics Canada and how we make the network operate and the governance of that are really, really high, very highly important elements. We can't get very far without having robust governance structures in place. So what I did is I highlighted in yellow the attributes, I think they are, that come out of this element that I worked on. So what's your mandate and value proposition? What is your community of stakeholders? How do you deal with engagement? What's your mission and vision? And kind of guiding values and principles. And I've put very brief responses to those in this little box, and then you can move on. So the next one's around strategic planning. What's in place? Do you have a strategic plan? Do you have roadmaps for what you're trying to do? Metrics to assess it? Mechanisms for monitoring performance? What kind of frameworks are in place? Do you have a risk management framework? Any policy advocacy done? So as you can see, it's about governance. But if you've got policy advocacy in there, that's looking outward, right? So it relates to the governance framework, but it's also how is your organization relating to those around you. Let's see. I'll just flip through the rest. Organizational structures and designs. What's the management structure? Do you review the terms of reference? Do you have them? So what I like about this is Andrew said it's not meant to be prescriptive. But if you are looking at your organization and saying, do we follow best practice? I see it like a metadata schema for an organization. That's the way I think of the GORC model. That's my best analogy. If you're looking at this, you can go, oh, terms of reference for the board, we actually never wrote those. Maybe we want to think about doing it. So it's not prescriptive, but it's useful to assess against best practices that are probably not practiced everywhere in one organization. One organization doesn't do them all, but if you look at the broad range, these are the kinds of things that are in place. Internal commons policies, this is all about the internal ways that things work, and then what kinds of principles do you align against? So this here we have fair, care, and trust, EDIA plans or policies that you follow, commitment to environmental sustainability, et cetera. There's also something about sensitive data, which to my organization is really key. So when I was filling this out, in order to reflect my organization through this model, I focused on the things that were the most central to us. And then, in the future, maybe you look at something else. So that's I guess, what I wanted to take you through with CRDCN. And yeah, question?
Thank you. Just before we move off GORC, and I hope if this is not helpful for a discussion or not the discussion we want to have, that's fine. We can chat about it later. I'm just curious, so from my organization's perspective, we've been doing work like this in a couple of different ways. So on the one hand, in the operations division, which is where I come from, there's very much a culture and background of doing these kinds of assessments using frameworks like the COBIT kind of framework and with maturity models and things like that. So that's sort of one area. Of course, coming from the RDM perspective, I've often found the COBIT data management framing not quite matching our context. So we've applied things like the Research Data Framework, or RDAF. So I guess the question is, on the one hand, it's so how do all these things kind of interrelate? If they don't, and that's fine if they're complementary, or if it's just you can choose one that best fits you, fantastic. So that's what kind of one hand question. And on the other hand is, has there been, so this was extremely helpful to hear how it's been applied in the CRDCN context, and some of the exercises that you've undertaken. So I guess have you thought about, or is there any guidance or advice on how to implement these, within the organizational context, especially if your organization already applies some of these other kinds of frameworks? So like COBIT has the concept of, you can have this, it can be umbrella, and they're interlocking frameworks, and it's recognizing COBIT can't do everything, so you would apply a different, more specific framework to your RDM context within the broader operation. So I guess any thought about that? Would it be a useful exercise to map some of these things, to see how they fit together and interlock, and then guidance for implementation?
So 2 questions, mapping to existing work and implementation. On the mapping piece, if you've already done some of this kind of stuff, I don't think we'd expect you to redo it. You can simply say, look, we've done this point over there. The broader question is, okay, you've sliced the world up this way. There are other ways of slicing the world up. What makes yours better? I don't think ours is better, but we recognise there's lots of things that we could potentially map to. And so one of the activities within the Global Open Research Commons International Implementations Working Group, or GORC 2WG, is a mapping task force, which is explicitly looking at the mapping piece. And so we're going through and we're saying, how does this map both to those very detailed technical frameworks that you've just described, as well as to some more quite conceptual frameworks like invest in open infrastructure or principles for open scholarly infrastructure. Those are the two that I'm working on. Or the International Data Spaces framework. There's a long list of things that we want to map to just to get a sense of how well does this fit with existing ways of thinking about things. So that's the mapping answer. The implementation answer is it's, I guess, going to happen. We don't have a lot of good implementation examples we can point you to at the moment because that work is kind of underway now. By the time the GORC 2 working group finishes, we're due to wrap up a bit before the next plenary, the next physical plenary in London next year. We would imagine we'd have a number of more detailed implementations we could point to, but that's work that's underway at the moment.
I'm just going to add something. I get stuck on the word implementation and adoption in this context because we've said it's not meant to be prescriptive, but what does it mean to implement this model? To me, it means to describe my organization based on this framework and then think about whether I want to make changes to different areas. What is that implementing? I don't know. I don't know that I would call it implementation or adoption. I'm not trying to change. Maybe we should debate those words. I'm not trying to change that, but I do think, I do think we shouldn't get too caught up on those elements when we're looking at it. Yeah.
Okay. We should pass to
one more question, and then we can move over. Yeah.
Thanks.
So, am I doing the slides, or are they doing the slides online? Okay, so I'll just...
For the moment, it would help. I am sorry. I don't know if you hear me.
Yes, we do, Françoise. Bonjour.
Yes, thank you, because now we see the slides. Before that, we did not see the slides, so I can do it with the slides which are online now. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Yes, so just quickly, I also have to apologise. I have to step out after this, but Stephen DeCosta, Link Digital, just so the Research Commons, the first-class citizen of Research Commons is essentially methodological science. Science is the citizen. As in conceptually scientific method, right? There's a qualitative reproducibility around the platform. There's an integrity to it, right? So a lot of the organisational constraints or the way you must organise your organisation to create a commons and maintain it over time reflect that. Whereas a service is fundamentally about end users. There's a different starting point. It's fitness of the service, not fitness of the organisation. So I would just caution adopting something like GORC as the starting point, because the service is the starting point, which means the end user is the starting point, the marketplace, I guess, for that service, things like that. But apologise, I have to go.
Yeah, that's fine. So my response to that would be I would want to distinguish between the research activity and the infrastructure that enables that research, but I'd really like to continue the conversation with you later. Okay. Do you want to be Françoise's mouse, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I still don't know if she's changing the slides or not, but can we see her face? Is that possible? Or is your face available, Françoise? We know it's late.
There.
Oh, there she is. Hello.
It's supposed to be available, but I don't see the slides when I show my face.
I see.
So
okay. Okay, no problem.
I have an issue.
Okay.
I can follow the slides from my tablet eventually.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we wanted to see you. We can do it either way. You can just go back and we can hear you very clearly.
Yeah. I think it's probably easier. We're convinced that Françoise is real and not an AI-generated bot. And if we switch back to the slides, and then we can just advance them as you ask us.
I think you want to do it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. So the idea was to tell you a few words about Recherche Data Gouv, which we really think is a national data service, whatever the definition is. But we are in an inclusive world here, so everything is okay. And to tell you how we are organizing ourselves to do the GORC modeling of Recherche Data Gouv. Next slide, please. So a few words about what we are. This is a complete ecosystem for sharing and opening research data. And so it is indeed a national research infrastructure, which is supported by the relevant ministry, which is now called French Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Space. 3 days ago, we changed the name. And it is also built for and by the research community at the national level. National and local research performing organizations, universities, and other higher education institutions are deeply involved in running, making it work, let's say. Next slide, please. So the GORC modeling is here to represent this complex system. We have a national research data platform with a data repository, a data catalog, competence centers with 36 federated competence centers, which are here in support to the research community. And this is the human part, which is very important in Recherche Data Gouv. And it's interesting to see if GORC is able to map this kind of part of the national research infrastructure. We have 81 institutions operating one or more services and over 400 staff members, not full-time, but part-time at least, dedicated to supporting research teams. The next slide is support to frighten you, because I would spend a lot of time to explain it, but I will not. It's just here for you to go back to it if you want to need more, if you want to have more information. Next slide, please. So again, the complex system to model with GORC. So why are we trying to do that and engaged in doing the modeling? Because it takes time. We are going into the details of the Excel sheet model. For Recherche Data Gouv, the European and international involvement is really important. And this is why Recherche Data Gouv participated actively when we were defining the interest group, the National Data Service interest group. We are interested in sharing our profile with our specific characteristics. And as I said already, one of the key characteristics is the huge network human support component. And we think that this can be useful for other NDS projects and for new projects. And I remember when we presented Recherche Data Gouv in one of the booths, the human capacity was really interesting for others, I would say. So we are interested in contributing to the template by providing our own example, and also to compare with other national data services at the international level. In the European context, as it was said, GORC is becoming a lingua franca for EOSC, for the European Open Science Cloud, and also the competence centers are interested to use it as a modeling tool. So we are really interested to be also in the EOSC part of the work around GORC. For the competence centers and also for the nodes, GORC is here to help to define the concept of node or competence centers and to compare, to identify common and different attributes for a given GORC type. And then we will be able to compare different GORC types. So this is more probably for the GORC interest group and working group, but it's also interesting for the National Data Service interest group, I would say. Next slide, please. So what we are doing, we already heard about the teamwork, and it was the starting point. The idea was that it was impossible to do a proper modeling if you don't have all the people with the different profiles involved in Recherche Data Group, involved also in the GORC modeling. So we need to have representatives from the governance, from the human support part, and from the technical aspects to build a model which is really representative. So what we are currently doing, we are preparing a complete profile in the spreadsheet, and for each model item, we have something which is probably more for internal use. Is this completed, ongoing, or it should be done? With a comment for each item, and maybe more for the version which will be shared. This item is relevant, this one is not. Next slide, please. So the preliminary finding, the modeling is ongoing. This is a team exercise. As Natalie explained, we have to share, to discuss, and align the different points of view. We ask people with different profiles to provide their own view of the model, and we compare, and we discuss when the evaluation of a given item is different for people from different profiles. It's something which is useful to discuss. So the model will provide the items and does provide the items to discuss, and also the vocabulary to describe them. And this is a good tool to build a common vocabulary for a team. So it's clear when we discuss that the things which are not yet done remain to be done and should be done. They are none from the project, but when discussing during the exercise, it makes them very explicit, and it helps to think about them afterwards. So what we are discussing when we will provide a public profile, do we provide a detailed description for each model item? At least we think we have to provide the reason why an item is tagged as non-relevant. So the preliminary result for sustainability, rules of participation and access, and engagement, we see that all the model items are relevant, except maybe one. But it seems we could discuss what the item really means before we decide it's not relevant. That's all, thank you. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Françoise, for that. Sorry, I was just fiddling with the microphone. Thank you for that very clear explanation. Are there questions in the room for Françoise? Okay, so I have a question for you, Françoise. The relevant, not relevant, sorry, what was it? Relevant, not yet relevant, not relevant. Do you think that the answers to those questions will change over time? And if so, when do you think it might be useful for your organisation to revisit this?
I guess this is more a question for Gilles, who is in the governance of the organisation, and I am not.
Is Gilles still?
Yeah, hello everyone. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, yes, very well.
Yes, I think the model has to be reviewed quite often. I wouldn't say necessarily on a regular basis, but definitely things change, and definitely things that might be deemed non-relevant at a given point in time might become relevant at some point later. Also, we had a discussion, and not just us, but I mean, together with the group and with you specifically, Andrew, about what we expect as behind the world relevant. Is it relevant because it's useful? Is it relevant because it makes sense? Is it relevant because we have done something? Is it relevant because we have not done it, but we want to do it? So definitely there are things that will be moving in the definition, and I think there should be a kind of timestamp stuff that says this is the model of the National Data Service at a given time, and we need to go through it again every now and then, every year or something like that maybe, just to make sure that it's still aligned.
Okay, thank you. I have to say we had some debate internally about whether relevant was the right word, and it's the least bad one we have at the moment. But if people have suggestions for better ones, we'd love to hear them. Okay, thank you very much, and my thanks again, Gilles, to you and Françoise for staying up into the early hours of your morning. We really appreciate it. Okay, so if we go back to the slides. So we have 14 minutes. So next steps. I should say, by the way, and this is my fault, I should have at the start of the meeting reminded people that there is a collaborative notes document for this session. I don't know if anyone has done anything in the collaborative notes. If not, it's my fault. So we may have to backfill some of the collaborative notes. What I will say, however, is that the recordings, the recording of this session that's being made at the moment will be made available 24 hours later through the app. So you'll have access to the recording. However, we know that taking photos of the screen, and I know some of you have been doing that, as a way of capturing some of the slides is not great, and reading video recordings of slides is even worse. So what I will do is I will do two things. Firstly, I will post the collaborative notes information. Sorry, Keith wants to say something.
Just the logistical thing. All the slides will be made available through all the slides of this conference will be made either available through the Research Data Alliance website or the SciDataCon website after the event. With a time delay, though. So that will probably take a few weeks to get that all collected and made available.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so for those of you that don't want to wait, what I can do is I can share the slides from this session with the people who are signed up to the National Data Services Interest Group, and I will do that. A number of the groups this week have already linked to the slides in their collaborative notes document. I'll probably do that as well. But so you should, after morning tea, if you're signed up to the National Data Services Interest Group, you'll get a copy of the slides posted to you. Okay, so do we want to try and meet outside the plenaries? At the moment, and this is, I think, again, my fault, we've mostly been meeting during the plenaries and not doing a lot between the plenaries. Would people like it if we held online discussions at kind of varying hours to accommodate time zones outside the plenaries? Would that be useful to kind of move the conversation forward a little bit more quickly?
If you want to talk, I have the mic, or you can just put your hand up.
Or you could just stick your hand up.
Yeah.
All those in favour of meeting more often? Yeah, well,
just
I know.
Remember to introduce yourself for people online too.
This is Lauren Maxwell from Universitätsklinikum Heidelberg. So I haven't been in the GORC 2 meetings, but I'm wondering, do you see a utility, for hosting meetings with the interest group as opposed to just joining the GORC 2? But what do you see as kind of the difference between what those two groups would be focusing on?
Yeah, I think the fact that we've revitalized this group suggests that while there's overlap between the areas of interest, it's not a complete overlap. So I think there's value in having discussions just between people that are interested in national data services as opposed to people that are interested in the various ways in which the GORC model is being picked up in lots of different settings. I think that, yeah. So I think there'd be value in having two separate streams of conversation. The question is how often we want to do that between the plenaries. Rory?
Yeah, hi, Rory McNeil. From ResearchBase and Meldrith and other things. So I think I'm correct, but again, I'm in a bit of a daze, that I think, and I participate in it, which is why I think I'm not hallucinating, that there's a GORC National Data Services Task Force.
Correct.
And that has, unless I'm hallucinating, that has been meeting regularly outside of the plenaries, and Gilles and Françoise are in that group, and so am I. So that's already one forum for having continuing meetings. I just mentioned that as to confirm that I'm actually not hallucinating.
You're not hallucinating. Unless we have a shared hallucination. So yes, Rory is correct. There is a joint task force between the National Data Services Interest Group, this one, and the Global Open Research Commons Interest Group, which has been talking about how we align our activities. And so yes, that would be one possible vehicle. People could join that group, and that would be one less group to start up for me, which is probably not a bad outcome. You
mentioned at the beginning, Andrew, that we need to really determine what our plan of work is for this group. So are there, what brought you to this session? What are the things that you think would be useful for a National Data Services group to tackle? And that maybe answering that will perhaps tell us whether we need to meet more or not. Because right now we don't have
No, that's
topics.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, Lauren?
So I think Françoise hit on this in her presentation, which is, the reason that I'm here, and I think this is interesting, is to see what everyone's doing. So making implementation decisions visible then can help us understand, what do we need to invest in or change to reach our objectives, and our objectives, I'm sure, are varied. So that's why I think this is interesting. And Françoise was saying that EASC is implementing GORC, which is interesting. So I'm curious to see how other infrastructures are making their implementation decisions visible through metadata.
Thanks.
Okay, so if there are no other immediate thoughts...
Is there anything from...
I just checked Françoise.
Oh, okay. Are they still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we might do is I might, as part of the post that I'm going to do to the interest group, I might share the details of what we're doing around the NDS GORC task force, share the details of when the next meeting is, and encourage people to join that if they're interested. As I said, we'll share the slides, and Natalie and I should have, my bad, I should say we have a third co-chair, Bernhard Miller from NFDI in Germany, NFDI/GASIS. I think he works at GASIS, but he's affiliated with NFDI. NFDI is the National Research Data Infrastructure in Germany. They have a booth out there, and that way, I think, if you're interested in them. So we'll review the statement of work and perhaps come back to you with a proposed update to the statement of work based on the discussion we've had here today. So in that case, I would like to thank you for coming. Thank you for your interest in the group and participation. And you can go out and pillage morning tea 5 minutes early. And thanks again to our French colleagues for joining us.
Thank you.